This is the haunted gallery at Hampton Court Palace. They say Catherine Howard ran screaming down this gallery, desperately trying to reach Henry VIII. But there is no contemporary evidence that she ever did. So why has this corridor become one of Britain's best-known haunted locations? And before we talk about the ghosts, I have one question. Did Catherine Howard walk through this gallery at all? Hello everyone, today we are at Hampton Court. We're here to look at what happened to Catherine Howard, what the Tudor records actually tell us, and how a story with so little historical evidence became one of Britain's most enduring royal hauntings. Catherine Howard was Henry VIII's fifth wife. We don't know exactly how old she was, but she was a very young woman when she married Henry in 1540. He was nearly 50 and he was approximately 30 years older than her. Cue eye rolling. Just over a year later, Archbishop Thomas Cranmer was told that Catherine had an intimate relationship with Francis Dereham before she married Henry. On the 2nd of November 1541, while Henry was attending Mass here at Hampton Court, Cranmer passed the information to him in writing. Henry initially refused to believe it, but then he was furious and he ordered an investigation. During the investigation, it emerged that Catherine had also been meeting Thomas Culpeper, one of Henry's servants, in secret. And there was a letter to incriminate her. We still don't know what happened between them, but secret meetings while Catherine was queen put her in terrible danger. Catherine was confined here at Hampton Court and questioned while Henry left the palace. She never saw him again, and within days, Catherine was removed from Hampton Court. 3 months later, she was executed at the Tower of London. And somewhere along the way, a story began to grow. A story that Catherine escaped her guards and ran screaming through this gallery, trying to reach Henry and beg for her life. But what did actually happen? The legend says that Catherine discovered she was facing a charge of adultery and broke away from her guards. She supposedly ran towards the Chapel Royal where Henry was praying, hoping to reach him and plead her innocence. She was caught just before reaching the door and dragged back to her rooms, screaming. This is still the story told on Hampton Court's visitors page. But when we look at historical evidence, the truth becomes less certain. The surviving investigation records are extremely detailed. They include Catherine's statements, testimony from her attendants, descriptions of secret meetings, messages carried between rooms, locked doors, back stairs, the seizure of her jewels, and arrangements for dismantling her household. And yet, there is no mention of Catherine breaking free from her guards. No screaming dash, no struggle outside the chapel, and no attempt to confront Henry. The silence doesn't prove that nothing happened. It means that it might have not been recorded accurately or not recorded at all. But this would have been an extraordinary detail in an investigation that was being documented in considerable detail. And then there is the physical layout of the palace. The haunted gallery already existed during Catherine's lifetime. Catherine's lodgings once stood on this side of the palace, and this is where she was confined before being taken to Sion House. This is called the Cartoon Gallery, but these were the new King's lodgings under Henry VIII. And behind that door, there would have been Catherine Howard's lodgings. The Tudor rooms were demolished and replaced by the Queen's apartments we see today. the chapel was also altered, and what we see today was remodeled under Christopher Wren. So Catherine's lodgings probably had their own route to the Queen's closet. It appears to have been the wrong route. So, if there's a place that should be haunted, it's probably this one. According to Hampton Court's own historians, the route from Catherine's apartments to the Chapel Royal would have not brought her through this gallery. There's also a problem with the timeline. Henry secretly left Hampton Court in the evening of 6th of November. The legend does not give a date for Catherine's alleged escape, so we cannot know if Henry had already left. But there is also no contemporary evidence placing Henry inside the chapel while Katherine tried to reach him. The part of the story comes entirely from later tradition. So while we cannot say that it never happened, the evidence supporting it is extremely weak. This is where things are a little bit frustrating, because ghost stories do not arrive with a clear date attached to them. They grow by repetition. Someone tells a story, someone else has the details, and before you know it, the story becomes so familiar that people stop asking where it began. I have not found a Tudor, Stuart, or Georgian account describing Catherine's run through the gallery. What we can say is that the full story was definitely in print by the late 19th century. In 1897, the historian and clergyman William Holden Hutton included the story in his illustrated book, Hampton Court. He described Katherine tearing herself away from her guards, running towards the chapel and being forced back to her rooms. He also wrote that her screams could still be heard on stormy nights. This doesn't prove that Hutton invented the story. He might have been repeating oral tradition. What it does prove is that the version of the story we recognize can be securely traced back to the late Victorian period, 300 years after the death of Catherine Howard. And the Victorians loved stories like this one, didn't they? By then, Hampton Court was no longer a main royal residence. Parts of the palace had been turned into rent-free apartments for people with connections to the crown, known as Grace and Favour residents. You gotta be careful. There is evidence that residents complained about cold, damp and uncomfortable apartments, but there is no evidence that they invented Catherine's ghost to get themselves moved into better rooms. Historic Royal Palaces acknowledges that Victorian and early 20th century storytelling helped Hampton Court's ghost legends grow. Staged photographs and postcards were even produced showing supposed palace spirits, including Catherine Howard. What we can reasonably say is that Hampton Court provided the perfect setting for the story to grow. And the Victorians were obsessed with Tudor executions, spiritualism, and ghosts. Perhaps the legend doesn't need to be invented by one person. The historical weakness of the story does not mean that nobody has experienced anything unusual in the gallery. Historic royal palaces say that more ghostly sightings and faintings have been reported along this stretch than anywhere else in a palace. It also reports that on one day in 1999, 2 women on separate tours fainted in the same spot. We do not know why they fainted, and there is no connection to what happened to them to Catherine Howard. But the repeated reactions to the same area were interesting enough for researchers to investigate. In May 2000, psychologist Richard Wiseman and his team carried out an experiment at Hampton Court. A total of 1,027 people took part. The researchers looked at 3 possible influences: belief in ghosts, suggestion, and unusual magnetic fields. People who already believed in ghosts reported more unusual experiences than people who did not. They were also more likely to explain those experiences as paranormal. Interesting, isn't it? But that was not the only finding. People repeatedly reported unusual sensations in the same parts of the palace, even when they did not already know which areas had a reputation for being haunted. So expectation may not have been the only influence. There may also have been something about the physical environment in those particular spots. Some experiences could have been connected to ordinary conditions, including subtle drafts and changes in air temperature. I find it a little eerie. The researchers also found tentative evidence of a relationship between the location where experiences were reported and local magnetic activity. Tentative is the important word here. The experiment did not prove that magnetic fields caused the experiences, and it certainly did not prove the existence of a ghost. What it showed was that expectation mattered, but it may not have explained everything. People genuinely reported strange sensations. That is very different from saying that everyone imagined it. But it is also very different from saying Katherine Howard was present. A little bit oppressive, doesn't it? Just a little. Yep. So why has Katherine Howard become attached to this gallery? Perhaps because the legend gives her story a physical shape. The real investigation was complicated. It involved private relationships, Tudor law, politics, and a king whose personal humiliation became a matter of state. The ghost story reduces all to that, to one unforgettable image. A frightened young woman running down a corridor trying to reach the man who has the power to save her. And once the corridor became known as the Haunted Gallery, every cold draft, shadow, and uncomfortable feeling gained a ready-made explanation. In this corridor, the story waiting for us is Katherine Howard. Katherine is not the only historical figure said to remain at Hampton Court. Jane Seymour, Henry's third wife, died at the palace shortly after giving birth to Edward VI. A pale woman carrying a candle is said to appear on the Silver Stick stairs on the anniversary of Edward's birth. Now, sadly, we cannot visit the stairs. The door is locked. Then there is Sybil Penn, sometimes known as Hampton Court's Grey Lady. Penn had served as a nurse within the Tudor royal household. Her tomb was disturbed during alterations to a nearby church in 1829, and stories of a grey female figure reportedly began spreading soon afterwards. And then there is the palace's most famous piece of modern ghost footage. In 2003, CCTV recorded a human-looking figure apparently opening a fire door. The door had reportedly opened without explanation on 3 consecutive days. The figure appeared on the 2nd day. No person was identified, and the palace security staff said they remained unable to explain the footage. None of these stories proves that Hampton Court is haunted, but taken together, they have given the palace an extraordinary supernatural reputation. Is that straightening it up? I love it. The historical evidence for Katherine running through this gallery is extremely weak. I don't think that it makes the story meaningless. The legend has given Katherine something that the official history often denied her: her voice. Well, thank you so much for watching. Now, do you think that Hampton Court is really haunted? Or do you think that the story has attached itself to this place in a way that people do now experience what they expect to find. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, please give us a thumb up, and I shall see you in the next one. Thank you for watching. Bye. Say hi.